Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls, our online services. I am Annette Lovell. I am your worship associate this morning, and I am here in our sanctuary with Reverend Kevin Carson and Drew White, our audio-visual technician. We would like to start our time together with a few announcements. First of all, please sign into the chat box. It's nice to see who is joining us this morning live. Also, the Women's Study Group is meeting this afternoon, today at 12:30 via Zoom. Contact Elizabeth Coyote ASAP if you do not have the link and you still want to join this afternoon. If you want to share a joy or a concern during the service, please type it in the chat box soon so that our support team can pull them together. It makes it much easier to share your individual thoughts when the time comes. Please remember to first indicate if it is a joy, sorrow, or a concern, and then type your thought in that you want us to share for you. We are no longer taking time during the service for our morning offering, but that does not lessen its importance. I am sure that everyone realizes that the church still needs your financial support right now, even most of all. So I encourage you to find the time in your schedule, sometime this week, maybe later this afternoon, to either visit our website, where you will find the Give button in the upper right-hand corner and pay via PayPal, or write a check the old-fashioned way and drop it to our P.O. box. Any and all monetary donations are greatly received. And lastly, Reverend Kevin would love the opportunity to meet more members and friends of this congregation. So please call him and set up an appointment for a Wednesday or a Thursday so that you can manage to safely meet together and get to know each other better. His email and phone number are included in the weekly updates. But if you cannot locate this information, email the worship team and one of us can provide it for you. Now that all the business of our announcements are over, let us prepare for our sacred time of worship together for a few moments for quiet and meditation. So close your eyes wherever you may be. Take deep breaths in and relax into your exhale. Listen to your breath. Feel your breath. Imagine us all together breathing in harmony as I ring the peace bowl 3 times. We will begin with our prelude. We have a congregational covenant we share every week. It helps us remember and vow to ourselves and each other how important some of our ideals are and how we need to strive to live these principles every day as a Unitarian Universalist. I will read the words this morning. I encourage you to recite it along with me in your own homes. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. A flame within a chalice is a sacred symbol of Unitarian Universalists. It has many different interpretations. Of course it does. We are UUs after all. But some of these interpretations include the light of reason, the warmth of community, and the flame of hope. The words that I have chosen today is our global chalice lighting, shared by the International Council of Unitarian Universalists. We are gathered here and now. For a moment, we've stopped working, studying, doing dishes. There are no tasks, no emails, no phone calls. We are gathered to feel closer to each other, to feel closer to ourselves, to feel closer to our deepest inspiration. The stream of life that runs through our body runs through the world. May we be open to see and hear in each other what our soul wants to say.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning comes from Mother Teresa. Love cannot remain by itself. It has no meaning. Love has to be put into action, and that action is service. Whatever form we are, able or disabled, rich or poor, it is not how much we do, but how much love we put in the doing, a lifelong sharing of love with others. I invite you to join in singing our opening hymn this morning, number 148, Let Freedom Span Both East and West.
Let freedom span both east and west, and love both south and north. In universal fellowship throughout the whole wide earth. In beauty, wonder everywhere, let us communion find. Compassion be the golden cord, close binding humankind. Beyond all barriers of race, of color, caste, or creed, let us make friendship human worth our common faith and deed. Then east and west will meet and share, and south shall build with north. One human commonwealth of good throughout the whole wide earth.
Today's Time for All Ages is a parable about the 7 social sins written by Elizabeth Coyote, the farmer and the fig tree. There once was a farmer with a beautiful fig tree. She loved that fig tree, And every morning she went out and looked at the fig tree. She admired its beautiful leaves. She inspected its flowers. And she watched the wasps come and go, laying their eggs and pollinating the flowers to make delicious figs. Every evening, she went out to the fig tree and wished it a good night. One morning, when she went out to the fig tree, she saw something terrible. There was a green beetle crawling across her fig tree. Wherever it crawled, the leaves crumbled behind it. She picked it off and squashed it, but 2 more appeared. "Whatever shall I do?" the farmer cried out. A large fig wasp appeared and spoke to her. "To remove beetles from your fig tree, you must be pure of heart." But the farmer let fear, anger, and greed for her figs overwhelm her. Every time she squished a beetle from the tree, 2 more appeared. Soon there were 7 beetles of sin crawling over her beautiful fig tree. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Without fear, without anger, without greed, she reached out and plucked a beetle from her tree. No more beetles appeared. 6 more times she removed a beetle from her fig tree. Slowly and calmly, she took the beetles to another shrub and set them down in the shade below it. "This is a better place for you than my tree," she said. "Please stay here." The beetles crawled into the shrub and disappeared into the branches. Returning to her fig tree, she admired its dark green, glossy leaves, its lovely flowers, and the wasps buzzing around. She smiled. The end.
This is our time to share our joys and concerns with each other, that they may be lifted up in our UU community. However, there were no emails that were received this week, and so far we do not see any comments in the chat box. So we will just light one candle for the joys, concerns, and sorrows that we choose not to share today.
Our reading this morning is an excerpt from the book, The Third Reconstruction, Moral Mondays, Fusion Politics, and the Rise of a New Justice Movement by the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II with Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove. When Jesus said, "Love your enemies," he wasn't simply stating a spiritual ideal to strive toward. He was also offering strategic advice for long-term success in any freedom struggle. Gandhi took his advice seriously and developed it into a philosophy of nonviolence, which came to America through the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955 to 56. After a year of battle, which concluded with a Supreme Court decision ordering the integration of Montgomery's buses, Martin Luther King Jr. made it clear that the violent struggle was not over. As St. Paul says in the book of Romans, we are more than conquerors when we engage in a moral struggle. It is not enough to conquer the opposition. In a nonviolent struggle, we are committed to fight on until we win our adversaries as friends. As King explained to his Montgomery congregation, the significant thing is that when you follow this way, when the battle is almost over, a new friendship and reconciliation exists between the people who have been the oppressors and the oppressed. This is the end of nonviolent struggle. A new nation, a new world where former enemies become co-laborers for the common good. We can never be friends with our enemies, of course, until they stop trying to destroy us. But even in the midst of a struggle, Jesus said we can love our enemies. As love seeks understanding, we can learn from them. Sometimes, in fact, they become our most important teachers as we develop tactics for the next stage of the battle. I invite you now to join in singing our next hymn, number 121, We'll Build a Land. The early history of our Unitarian Universalist faith is mostly a story of free thinkers who challenged the institutions and theological doctrines of their times, sometimes paying the ultimate price for daring to promote liberal theology in the face of church authority. But over the last 2 centuries, thanks in part to a general increase in religious tolerance around the world, and the religious freedom we enjoy in America in particular, the central concerns of our faith have shifted from theological beliefs to social justice and making the world a better place. Indeed, it has become a vestigial historical irony that the name Unitarian Universalism reflects two theological positions so important to the two ancestral roots of our tradition, but of relatively little importance today as our movement has become committed to theological diversity. We aspire, at least, to live up to the ideal expressed by Thomas Jefferson, who famously said, "It does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg." Working for a more just and equitable society has been important to us for centuries. But since the early 1800s, it has become the essential core of our movement. Early affirmations and other writings of both the Unitarians and Universalists spoke of building the kingdom of God, and later ones spoke of creating the beloved community. It is a common theme preached in sermons and in the hymns we sing. We'll build a land where justice shall roll down like waters and peace like an ever-flowing stream. And of course, it is the Spirit that drives our 7 principles when we affirm values like the worth and dignity of every person, acceptance, justice, equity, and compassion, use of the democratic process, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence. Our values reflect our vision for a better society. And even if our goals seem hopelessly optimistic at times, we can still make a difference, and already we have. You don't have to look very hard, of course, to see that our vision is far from being realized. These last few years, it feels like we have even regressed in some ways, and pundits of all stripes are eager to suggest why. There are certainly new factors to consider, such as the internet and the influence of social media. But most of the ills that plague society have been with us for a very long time. Nearly 100 years ago, Mahatma Gandhi published a list of 7 social sins that erode the possibility of a better world. And today I want to explore his list to see how they might still be relevant in modern American society. So first, let me say a little about the background and content of the list. Historians are not certain about the origin of Gandhi's list, which was published in his weekly newspaper, Young India, on October 22, 1925. The only commentary he included with the list in the paper was that a fair friend had sent it to him who wanted, quote, readers of Young India to know, if they do not already, the following 7 social sins. Gandhi added that naturally the friend does not want the readers to know these things merely through the intellect, but to know them through the heart so as to avoid them. It seems likely that Gandhi was forwarded the list by someone in England who was familiar with a sermon at Westminster Abbey 6 months earlier by Reverend Frederick Lewis Donaldson, a well-known socialist Anglican clergyman, since that sermon included an almost identical list. The list became famous by association with Gandhi, as quoted material often does. And it became even more so after it was learned that Gandhi had given a handwritten version of the list to his grandson Arun on their final day together shortly before his assassination. The 7 social sins he identified are as follows: wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, religion without sacrifice, and finally, politics without principle. We might debate whether this list is sufficient, perhaps, but I think it is easy to see why each of these so-called social sins made the cut. So now let us dig a little deeper. wealth without work. This one is probably the easiest to analyze, especially in this time of global pandemic. Income inequality and an economic system that is rigged to favor the wealthiest among us is one of the major political issues in the upcoming elections. It is remarkable to see how easily those who control the vast majority of the nation's wealth can convince so many of our neighbors to vote against their own self-interest. The super wealthy continue to thrive, but the COVID pandemic has revealed who the real essential workers are in society. The healthcare workers and first responders, the farmers, truck drivers, and grocery workers in our food supply, the teachers, sanitation workers, and this list goes on and on. Those who are often the most economically vulnerable and underprivileged. The political power of wealth is undeniably strong, but historical examples prove it is not invincible. Perhaps exposing how much we depend on those who are so often taken for granted will be the one good thing that comes out of this pandemic, and we can move the needle in the right direction. Pleasure without conscience. Pleasure without conscience overlaps with many of the issues I just mentioned about income inequality. It is too easy for those of us with the means to enjoy life to ignore our dependence on others to make this possible. But it's not only a matter of economic injustice. American consumer culture is demonstrably unsustainable for the planet, both in depleting resources and hastening the extinction of countless species. And our continued dumping of carbon into the atmosphere will have repercussions for generations who will have to contend with a changing climate. Individualism is a hallmark of American society, and our UU faith has long affirmed the individual's search for truth and meaning and the right of conscience. But we must never forget the common good. All of us live in an inextricable web of relationships. Knowledge without character. Like pleasure without conscience, I believe the sin of knowledge without character is easiest to recognize in the emphasis on materialism in American culture. It is present in an education system that is too focused on achieving the material rewards that come from getting a, quote, good job, rather than building character, critical thinking, and broadening our understanding of the world. Our Unitarian ancestors spoke of salvation through character and the need for self-culture to grow into our full humanity. And I think this is the way we avoid the pitfall of this social sin. The quest to learn is fundamental to human nature, but how we apply the knowledge we acquire is a moral question that reveals our character. Commerce without morality. For some people, commerce without morality would probably be hailed as a motto to live by, or something we would be glad to include on the family coat of arms. I'm sure we can all think of examples of corporations placing profits above morality, knowingly harming or killing people with complete disregard, or hiding important information that could harm them financially. It is easy to point to companies pushing cigarettes while denying their addictive nature, or chemical companies polluting neighborhoods with toxic waste. But we must remember that people made those decisions, not some nameless, faceless corporation. Likewise, we all make moral decisions in the commerce we conduct in our daily lives. Every item we purchase is a moral choice about how it is produced, how we plan to use it, and how we may ultimately dispose of it. For example, do we choose organic produce to reduce pesticide use? Do we eat meat knowing how grazing impacts climate change? Do we purchase a cheaper item of clothing knowing that it was manufactured in a foreign country where labor is exploited even more than in America? Do we upgrade our phone knowing the environmental and human rights issues associated with extracting the rare earth metals necessary for its manufacture? Every transaction is a moral choice, and we should at least acknowledge this in our decision making. Science without humanity. Science without humanity falls into a similar category as commerce without morality, and many times the two overlap. Science itself is value neutral, but it boils down to the choices we make when we apply our scientific knowledge or pursue new possibilities without considering the ethical implications. It is easy to see how a moral debate arises about something like the decision to use the atomic bomb. But what about something like stem cell research or genetically modified organisms? How do we make sure our ethics keep pace with our advances in scientific knowledge? This will be a constant challenge, I suspect, particularly as we learn more about the genetic sources of disease and the potential to modify life in ways we can have yet to imagine. Maybe our science fiction writers will provide some guidance for us as the future unfolds. Already there are plenty of cautionary tales that hint of how our best laid plans could end in a dystopic future. Religion without sacrifice. I do not care for the word sacrifice in this usage, and I would suggest that religion without commitment is a better phrase. This social sin is rooted in our failure to remain true to our religious ideals in practice, and hypocrisy is plainly on display all around us. In a nation that claims to be rooted in Christian values, it is hard to see much evidence of loving one's enemies or even loving one's neighbors. But I don't want to simply call out the hypocrisy of others without admitting that all of us fall short on occasion, both as individuals and as religious movements. It is hard to always live up to our religious ideals because nobody is perfect. And when it comes to religious movements, they are made up of a whole bunch of imperfect people living in an imperfect society. So what do we expect? Just think about how our own Unitarian Universalist Association is struggling to address our history of racism and white privilege these last few years. I think it is especially hard for us since we rarely speak about sin and forgiveness. But I will leave that complex theological topic for a future sermon. Politics without principle. Finally, we come to the social sin that is most clearly on display with our national election already underway. I probably don't need to say much more, but if you need evidence, just turn on the news, check your Facebook feed, or look for the latest tweet. Politicians have always been suspected of lying and corruption, and rightfully so, but now it seems that such misdeeds can be done in plain sight with few repercussions. There is so much corruption that pundits even speak of scandal fatigue. What I find most disturbing is seeing principles and integrity set aside so easily, even by some who used to at least project the appearance of having a moral compass. It is okay to disagree on principles, debate the matter, and fight through legitimate channels for what you believe in. But our nation has become so divided that civil discourse seems to have vanished from the public arena. Some people are content to simply yell louder and win at any cost by any means. Serving the common good has taken a back seat to gaining and keeping power in order to facilitate further corruption. I have never felt as concerned for democracy in America as I do these days. But I hold fast to the knowledge that most Americans are decent folks, and this terrible period too shall pass. So there you have my brief analysis of how these 7 social sins are impacting society today. And I hope this exercise has at least provided food for further thought. I think they're a good framework for examining the social sins that continue to harm American society. But as Gandhi warned us in his brief commentary, it is important that we know these things not merely through the intellect, but through the heart, so as to avoid them. This may be a challenge for us as Unitarian Universalists more than for some people, because we are an intellectual bunch that has historically favored thinking over feeling. Social sins are foremost the result of individual choices we make. And fortunately, most of our choices, even our worst ones, do not cause significant harm, but some may. Some social sins, such as racism, are more aggregate in nature and reflect our combined failures to live up to our better vision of the world. But even so, we can make choices as individuals that will chip away at the barriers to a more just society. It is so easy to get angry when we look around us and see an unjust world. And what we are now seeing should certainly make us angry. But simply getting angry is only the beginning, the motivation for doing something about it. I'm not so naive as to believe we can dispense with the 7 social sins entirely, no matter how hard we try. But I do believe that awareness and reflection, combined with lots of hard work, can help live the beloved community into being. Our vision will always lie just beyond our reach, perhaps. But isn't this what a vision is for? For now, let us try hard to live according to our principles, work for a more just society, and be our best selves as much as possible. It is all we really can do, and it is enough. I invite you to sing our closing hymn, number 170, We Are a Gentle, Angry People, verses 1 through 4. Our closing words are adapted from the Reverend William Sinkford. We are a gentle and generous people, but let us not forget our anger. May it fuel not only our commitment to compassion, but also our commitment to make fundamental changes. Our vision of the beloved community must stand against a vision that would allow the privilege of a few to be accepted as just and even holy. Our religious vision must again and again ask, who is my neighbor? And strive always to include more and more of us. As we intone the words that gave birth to this nation, we the people, we are, and we should be, both a gentle and an angry people.
We will now extinguish our chalice with the following words. If you wish, join me with the recitation. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And we also invite you to our virtual coffee hour directly after the service. The link was included in the email for today's service. It is time for our postlude. Be safe and be well. Until next week.